Wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody. It is nice to see people flooding into the Zoom room, as it were. My name's Jessie Wild, and I am the Deputy Director of the Bristol Housing Festival. Just as people are arriving, I want to tell you a little bit about the Bristol Housing Festival and what we've got going on over the next couple of weeks. So, last week, we started our 2021 Expo, which is really exciting. So we had a few events going on. And if you missed any of those, most of the webinars are already up on our YouTube. So if there's anything that you missed that you've been interested in, then feel free to check out our YouTube channel, which is where all the webinars are. This week is the second week of our 2021 Expo. This year, we're managing to do a kind of virtual and in-person one, a bit of a hybrid model, which I think most people are doing at the moment. And this week is our second week of the two, and we have a mixture of webinars and in-person events. So if you haven't already done so, do check out our events tab on the Bristol Housing Festival website, and you can see everything that's going on this week. Later on today, we've got a webinar that is being sponsored by Urban Splash in partnership with BBRC. And that's going to be a really interesting webinar looking at kind of how to make community assets work. Tomorrow, we've got an in-person event with the community-led homes, community-led housing trust as well. And then also later on in this week, we've got various different events too. So do take a little look at our events lineup and do sign up for anything and everything that you'd like to be a part of. We'd love to have you at as many of the events as possible. Now, enough of my chat about the Housing Festival. Let's get into this webinar. So really delighted to welcome Jessie Carter from the Bristol Housing Festival, Alan McLeod from Bristol One City, Mark Pendry from L&G Modular Homes, Stephen Bland from UN Habitat, and shortly we will be joined by Councillor Tom Reynard from Bristol City Council as well. So this is shaping up to be quite an exciting lineup and conversation, and we are focusing on the UN Habitat's Climate Smart Cities Challenge this year. Now, back in April, Bristol One City and the Bristol Housing Festival were selected as a city, Bristol, along with 3 other cities around the globe. And we were invited to collaborate in an open innovation Climate Smart Cities Challenge with the aim of developing, testing and scaling cutting edge solutions to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So Bristol Housing Festival, Bristol One City have been working with UN Habitat and with Nesta to develop this challenge specifically for Bristol. And that challenge is going to be launched in Dubai at the World Expo next month. During this webinar, we're going to have a conversation about that, go into more of the details of that, explore a little bit of the challenge and what it actually means and why it's important. And there is going to be opportunity for Q&A as well. So you should see along the bottom of your screen, you've got a Q&A box as well as a chat box. If I could please ask you to put all your questions in the Q&A box, it just really helps as chair to be able to know who I'm directing it to. And if you have a specific question for someone specific, do make sure you mention that in your question and I can direct it to the right person. Wonderful. So just to make you aware, this webinar is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on YouTube. So if you do miss any of it, or you've got colleagues that want to watch it, then you can point them to the YouTube page afterwards. Right, enough of me. I'm going to hand you over. We're going to go through the panel and have introductions from everybody, and they're going to also share a little bit, sort of 2 or 3 minutes, about their organisation and how they've been involved, and just to give a bit more of a context of this conversation, and then we will move into a panel discussion and questions and answers. So do feel free to start popping your questions in that Q&A box as soon as you have any. So we're going to move from Jessie through to Alan, and then we will go from Stephen to Mark, and then hopefully by that point Councillor Tom will have joined us as well to give us his introduction. So Jessie, let me hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much, Jessie. I'm Jessie Carter. I'm part of the Bristol Housing Festival team and have been largely leading on this project since we discovered it earlier this year. And it's been great to work with Bristol One City and Bristol City Council. There's Councillor Tom Reynolds join us, welcome, on the Climate Smart City Challenge. And we just believe it's such a great opportunity for Bristol. As many of you will know, Bristol's facing a number of challenges at the moment, including a housing challenge, the construction skills shortage, climate crisis, and an ecological emergency. And we really believe that all of these challenges have to be considered together if we're going to find solutions that really work for all of Bristol's residents. So this challenge is just a wonderful opportunity to have innovators come alongside us and see if we can find some solutions. So from me today, I want to just explain a little bit about the challenge that we actually put forward. So when we put in our bid for Bristol to host this challenge, we had to tell UN Habitat and the other partners, what is the problem that we're really trying to solve? And I think when we start to think about greenhouse gas emissions and how to become carbon neutral or low carbon, our mind often jumps to the technology, and we're thinking, well, how do we heat things better? How do we build differently? But actually in the UK today, we have all the technology we need to build low carbon housing and to retrofit all of our existing housing stock. So it's not actually a question of the technology. It's a question of the innovation that we actually need is in the financial model that we use to deliver that housing. So we ran a number of stakeholder focus groups over the last few months, just trying to ask people, what are the barriers to implementing this technology? And unanimously across everyone we spoke to, they said the problem is cost and the problem is viability. So this is what we're really hoping to put to the innovators. We've said what we need is a new financial model. At the moment, development is driven by immediate capital cost and return. And ultimately, we're going to have to find a different way to do that if we're going to be able to move forward into the future for both sustainable green homes and also affordable homes. And I think at the heart of it, it's really a question of value. So, we can build these homes, they are more expensive, but arguably they're actually better value. If we consider the full lifetime cost of the building, if we consider the future cost to residents, if we consider the cost of the planet, we realize that, immediate capital cost and return isn't the full picture. And so while some of this work has already been started with, the Bristol social value policy, which already looks for different ways to value things that aren't just based on financial viability, we're really hoping that innovators will be able to take some of these ideas and develop them further so that we can get to a point where green, low carbon, affordable housing is actually a viable solution for all of the stakeholders involved. So we're really looking forward to seeing how the challenge progresses. And I'm going to hand over to Alan, who's going to talk a bit more about One City.
Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, my name's Alan McLeod. I'm one of the operations and stakeholder engagement managers at the City Office. And for those of you who don't know what the City Office is and what it does, we're a partnership organisation within the council. We aim to try and drive action towards the long-term challenges that the city faces by aligning the visions of organisations and individuals in Bristol towards the long-term vision that we have for the city for 2050, that by 2050, Bristol will be a fair, healthy and sustainable city, a city of hope and aspiration where everyone can share in its success. And so one key element of this and one of the key long-term challenges that we face is, as Jessie mentioned, the climate challenge and the climate emergency. But alongside that, we also face a housing crisis in the city. And we have recently declared an ecological emergency as well. And I think the reason for adopting the City Office model and the reason for working in this way is that actually to deliver on any of these issues, we need to be working in an integrated and holistic way. We need to be thinking about how we can better partner with each other, how we can work with other organisations outside of just the local government to deliver these challenges. Because for something like the climate emergency, our footprint as a local authority isn't anywhere near as big as the wider footprint of the city. And so we need to work with many others to actually deliver on that emergency and to make radical inroads into this entrenched challenge. And that's the same for the ecological challenges we face and for the housing crisis that we face in the city. And so as a city office, we're trying to ensure that we bring together organizations to tackle those challenges. And in essence, the Climate Smart Cities challenge that we're talking about today is a great example of how we're trying to do that. We're trying to bring the weight of the city to bear on this challenge. Jessie's already mentioned some of the work, and we'll come on to it a bit later about how we've been doing that. But the key is that we're trying to ensure that people across the city are engaging with this idea, engaging with these emergencies, and thinking about how they can work on these integrated challenges and interconnected challenges as well. I think I'm handing to Mark, is it now, or is it Stephen?
Let's go to Stephen next. That would be ideal. Thanks so much, Alan.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone in Bristol. I'm calling you from Cape Town in South Africa. My name is Stephen Bland. I work for UN Habitat both in our climate change team and in our innovation unit. And as a result, this project is very exciting because it's right at the interface of those two topics, climate change and innovation. And for those of you that don't know, UN Habitat is the UN agency that has a mandate or responsibility to deliver on the UN's sustainable urban development goals. So the urban goals related to the SDGs that you know. And so we work across the world, predominantly not in Europe, more in countries in the global south, to support them on a whole range of urban development topics, working mainly with both our member states, national governments, and also with local governments. And so the Climate Smart Cities Challenge is a really exciting project that, as mentioned by Jessie at the beginning, we put out a call to innovators to ask them to cities, sorry, a call to cities, first of all, to ask them to put forward their key climate change challenges. And we're running this project using something called challenge-driven innovation, which is a really exciting way of kind of turning on its head the way we normally go out for solutions. And rather than going out to the market with a very, very well-defined procurement note in terms of reference, which details exactly what you need in all sorts of detail and completely limits the possibility for innovation. In challenge-driven innovation, the idea is kind of the opposite. You put your challenge out there, and then you ask innovators and providers, solution providers, to try and come and help you solve that challenge in a collaborative process. So it's an exciting kind of methodology to work with. And I should mention that UN Habitat is just one of many of the partners involved in the project. The other main one being Viable Cities, which is a strategic innovation program in Sweden, and also Nesta Challenges, which maybe you've heard of. They're based in the UK. So we're all working collaboratively with Bristol on this, as well as 3 other cities that were also selected. So why did we decide to work with Bristol? We put out this call. We had 20 applications from cities around the world. And Bristol was scored in the top 4 in our very detailed scoring process. We had 3 reviewers and then a larger number of reviewers that then reviewed the reviews. And so it was a very in-depth process. And what were we really looking for, and why was Bristol selected? So the first thing that we really saw strongly from Bristol was commitment to the topic of climate change and housing. Bristol is well known, not just in the UK, but actually around the world as a city that's put in a lot of effort and commitment to the topic, particularly that we read about on the topic of climate change, being the European Green Capital, I believe, some years ago. That was a promising sign. And so for us, that's a very important part of why we selected Bristol, because we wanted to work with local governments and their partners that had strong political and community sort of commitment to this topic. So that was one. The other one was the topic that you're dealing with, housing and climate change. And this was, I guess, attractive to a project like this for 2 reasons. One, because of its replicability. I mean, it's a challenge that almost every local government around the world is dealing with, a housing crisis and the climate change issue. And no one really has found a way to hit both of these goals at the same time, if you like, housing affordability and net zero. And so we knew it would be very relevant for other cities to learn from your experience. And also, as I mentioned, the fact that this is a really exciting challenge to try and solve, because no one's really done it yet. And so it's perfect for a project such as this, that we try and do something new, and that Bristol can be at the cutting edge of that. We also took a little bit of a risk choosing Bristol, because a lot of the time in projects like this, there's a heavy focus on technology. And as you heard from the Bristol representatives earlier, that's not really what they believe is the main problem here. And so we took a little bit of a risk. We were fascinated by their understanding of the problem, and that it really comes down to an issue of financial viability and the financial model that's used in housing. And so we thought, well, this is a great opportunity to try and use challenge-driven innovation to solve a problem like that, and not just to put out a call to innovators for a new technology. So it's a little bit risky, and what we're doing here is we're kind of trying to innovate also in the project as we go along, and not just ask the innovators that will come forward with their ideas, but that we also have to try and do things that perhaps are a little bit uncomfortable or difficult, or that we haven't quite worked out how it will all work in the end. And so that was also in the end one of the attractive features of Bristol's application. So yeah, I'll stop there, and I'm sure that there'll be a chance to answer questions later. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Mark, we come to you next.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Mark Pendry. I'm head of sustainability for a company called Legal & General Modular Homes. Legal & General Modular Homes is owned, as it says on the tin, by Legal & General Group, which is a large financial services company, and has a very kind of clear ethos about something called inclusive capitalism, which is all about kind of leveraging the value of their investments today for the betterment of kind of current and future generations. So one of the things that it's done as a business, it's kind of invested very heavily in city regenerations around the UK. It's invested heavily in things like North Sea wind power, and even things like electric vehicle charging. And about 4 years ago, it set up Legal & General Modular Homes. And again, it was a long-term investment that really was looking at this housing crisis that we're faced and trying to come up with a kind of a new and innovative route to solving or helping to contribute towards a solution, I should say, a kind of a new route to providing kind of high quality new homes in a quicker way. And obviously, with the housing crisis in the UK, it's well known. We have a shortfall in the number of properties that we need, somewhere in the region of 300,000. And modular kind of provides this way to industrialise housing. So what we do is we build something called modules in a factory in deepest, darkest Yorkshire. They're fully fitted out, and they literally do come with a kitchen sink included. They also include things like the toilet roll holder. It's completely finished inside as a home, and then they're put on the back of the modules, put on the back of a lorry, and shipped out to a construction site. The modules are put onto pre-prepared foundations, connected together. So we have 2 modules for a 2-bed house. We have 4 modules for a 3-bed house, and then we clad, and we usually use brick, kind of trying to reflect the kind of local traditions of the areas we're working in. Add a roof and hand over the keys. So it's a kind of really interesting and quick and speedy process. We've got 2 modular systems that we use. One is made out of something called cross-laminated timber, which we use for our homes, and then we use a concrete steel hybrid solution for apartments. And the intention is, in the long term, is that we will be building 3,000 homes from our factory. So kind of quite a substantial increase in terms of supply. And modular brings a lot of benefits to it. It's quicker to build. That means there's less disruption to people living next to the construction sites. It's also able to provide a quicker supply of homes. So particularly for kind of housing providers, you know, they can get kind of an instant supply almost of homes. It's less sensitive to delays around weather. We can also, there's a clear construction skills issue in the UK as well. And one of the things that we do in the factory is the way that the product's designed. We can take on unskilled labour or relatively unskilled labour and invest in them as people to kind of give them the necessary skills that they need to build the modules. We're able to achieve amazing levels of quality. It's absolutely fantastic, the product that we produce. It's very traceable. We've got really robust supply chains. And long term, I think the industrialization process will enable kind of more houses to come onto the market, and hopefully we'll start kind of addressing the cost of homes. So I think kind of Jessie picked up in her starting points around, you know, the technology is there, and it is. Modular is able to be used to provide low carbon homes. So the houses that we produce are all EPCA rated. So that's, I think in the UK in 2020, only 1.4% of the homes, new build homes constructed, were EPCA rated. So we're kind of low carbon already. We use PV and air source heat pumps to get us to that point. And we're really, really close to achieving a net zero regulated carbon home as well. And then long term, we've got this objective around achieving net zero operational carbon. And we'll maybe talk about the definitions of carbon, because I think that's often one of the problems that we have. So I think from my perspective, then, we've got the technology to deliver affordable quality net zero carbon new build homes, but there are issues, I think, around kind of delivery of these. And I think kind of finance is obviously one of the issues, but also as well, I think the planning system. Now, it's kind of been great working in Bristol with our scheme there in Bonington. But I think that there are kind of is acknowledged that planning is very slow in the UK. But then equally as well, it needs to kind of be the kind of setting the standards. So I think there's a real issue that maybe we can explore later on there. But also as well, retrofitting. I think that's kind of a big part of the challenge as well, is how we can make retrofitting. I mean, that's the rump of the UK's stock and the rump of the carbon emissions. So we need to have a think about what we can do there. But I'll hand over.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark. Tom, can we come to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about why is this challenge exciting from Bristol's perspective?
Brilliant. Hello, everyone. So I'm Councillor Tom Menard. I'm the Ward Councillor for Portfield. I'm also the Cabinet Member for Housing Delivery and Homes. I've been in the brief since May, so it's been a lot of getting up to speed. And one of the things I've been really excited about is this work and the opportunity for us to really set out our stall in what we're hoping to achieve as a council, and work within the context of the challenge brief, which I know the team have been working really hard on. I'm really excited for when that challenge brief is launched. For us as a council, we sit in a space of having, we've got a lot of ambition within the council, a lot we want to do and a lot we want to achieve. And really, increasingly, we want to put ourselves on the global stage. I think, you know, it was referred to earlier about sort of the green capital that we were a few years ago. And what we want to do is really set out our stall as a city about how we can be the best city to live in, but also a city that is bringing together social justice alongside addressing the climate emergency. The challenges we face as a city are stark. And you know, we've got sort of 16,000 people on our waiting list for housing in this city. We've got over 800 in temporary accommodation as well. You know, these are big challenges and not ones you can sort of click your fingers and fix overnight, and ones where we've really got to think about, well, what are those opportunities for innovation and how do we bring people together to accelerate the innovation that we can do, the way that we can do things differently as well. You know, Mark was talking about sort of the challenges of planning, and you know, that was a very real challenge, I think, for us as we were taking forward the Innovate UK work of how do we get our systems to work differently, because our existing systems are set up to behave in a particular way and not to necessarily allow for that innovation. And so it's been a huge amount of work, I think, to get us thinking differently, to get us doing differently, and then being exemplar that other cities in the UK and hopefully globally can look at and see, well, look what Bristol are up to. Let's go and have a conversation with them. Let's go on a learning exchange and see what we can learn from each other, because there'll always be things we'll be picking up ideas from elsewhere. So the opportunity to address some of the real challenges we're facing and to contextualise it, you know, the modern methods of construction, delivering quicker. You know, we've got sites that will deliver a year quicker than they otherwise would have done through sort of traditional construction, where we know we've got a skills shortage, and that will potentially only get worse as more construction workers retire in the coming years. So we have got to really think about things really differently. So I think that's the really key thing. What really kind of excites me is the opportunity to work with people that are all like, yeah, let's go do stuff and let's go really change things. Let's go kind of tear up the system and do it all really differently, and try and find the other people that are out there that want to work with us to enable that to happen. And I think what I'm kind of not naive about at all is that journey is not going to be easy, but it's only by sort of working together that we're going to get to where we need to be and address our housing issues and our housing challenges. So actually, by the end of my term in, May 24, regardless of what happens, but beyond there, I'll be able to actually kind of see families that have been able to move into affordable accommodation in the city and know we've made a fundamental difference to their lives. I think I'll probably just leave it there for now, and so we can move on to questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you so much to our panelists for those introductions, just setting out a bit of the context of the work around this Smart Cities Climate Challenge in Bristol. Do pop any questions you might have if you're watching this into the chat, and I will see what I can get to. We have already had some questions submitted beforehand, so I am going to work through those unless anyone has some burning questions that they pop in the Q&A box. But to start with, I wondered if we could come back to Jessie and Alan, who we heard from right at the beginning. I just wondered if you could give us a bit more of an overview of what's happened so far. So obviously Bristol was selected as one of the 4 partner cities. We're putting together this challenge brief. What so far has that looked like, and what's been the process of getting that challenge brief sorted out, ready for its launch in November?
Yes, so it's been a great few months, and we've been in what's been called the challenge definition phase, and that's sort of taken various forms. The first thing we did was we had a stakeholder workshop called a discovery workshop, where we invited stakeholders from across the city, about 30 of them, I believe, to ask them their perspective on this particular challenge. So our goal for that was we really wanted to understand stakeholder needs, how stakeholders felt, how the different stakeholders experienced this challenge and what they believe the barriers to be. And then we also just wanted to get a deeper understanding of the system. So that workshop was led by UN Habitat, and we had big Miro boards, and everyone had the chance to kind of just go wide with their thinking and really hash out what some of those pain points were and what some of those issues and challenges were. So that was a really interesting workshop. It was over 2 days, 2 different mornings. And then we went away, took that information and had a stakeholder engagement phase. So as part of that initial workshop, we'd worked out which stakeholders we really needed to understand more deeply and their connection to the challenge. So we hosted 3 focus groups, one with developers and housing associations, another with ecological and climate experts and sustainability experts, and the third one was with financiers and lawyers, people that might have some insight into some of the financial challenges. And we basically just asked all of them the same questions. What are the barriers to affordable and low carbon homes? What are the opportunities, and what are the future barriers and opportunities? And that was incredibly insightful, really helped us to get a much deeper understanding of what those challenges were. And that then informed writing a very long challenge brief document, where we then paired that with desktop research and explored the different concepts and different data sets that we needed to. And we finally got to the end of that process. We've written the challenge brief, which will go out to Innovators. We have a challenge statement, and I believe that's all being packaged as we speak, ready for the launch in Dubai on the 3rd of November. So I think we're all quite excited to get to this part where we've all of our hard works come together and we get to present that to people. I may have I left anything out, Alan?
I was going to say, no, that's
pretty comprehensive, I think. Yeah.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much.
Detailed
answer.
I
was going to say, Alan, from your perspective, how is the One City model? How have you seen that working in practice in order to facilitate that development of the brief?
So Jessie's mentioned the 2 workshops in particular, and then the focus groups, and I think with a lot of help from the Housing Festival and your networks as well, we've basically been able to call on and pull in a wide range of stakeholders from across the city to understand their perspectives on this challenge and to understand what they see. So we've been able to draw from groups like our Black and Green ambassadors, from the climate advisory committees, from the various equalities groups that we work with in the city, to to hear about their info and inputs into this in terms of their expertise and their experiences. But we've also been able to call on partners from a variety of the One City boards. So our city office is structured around 6 key themes, and each of those themes has a board made up of representatives from those sectors. And so we've been able to pull in representatives from those networks as well, and effectively say, we want to hear from the city, and we can share it out through the network that we have as a city, out through the channels, and then draw back that intel back through those workshops and through then one-to-one meetings with some people who weren't able to make those workshops, and also through the engagement that we did through the focus groups. And all of that we've then been able to consolidate into the challenge brief and ensure that the detail and the ideas and expertise of the city are reflected in the challenge. And we've then been able to similarly draw from insight within the council, from existing plans, policies and documents, and ensure that actually it covers both what the local government is thinking and working on, at the same time as covering what the organisations, communities and individuals of the city are doing. And so in essence, it's One City in action, trying to draw the city into the writing and communication and drafting of this brief.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alan. And Tom, just coming to you, there's a question in the Q&A about what successful outcomes from this challenge will look like for Bristol. And that ties very neatly as well into a question we had before the beginning of the webinar around how do we balance these competing challenges? And I know we've spoken previously about the balance. So I don't know whether that's quite the right word, but I'm going to stick with it. The balance between competing housing need and the competing needs of our planet, the ecology crisis, the sustainability crisis. So obviously this is something that the Nesta challenge, the Smart City challenge, is looking to address. What does, in that context, how do we go about balancing it, and what is success going to look like for Bristol in that?
Small question. No, so joke aside, I think there are some huge challenges, because I think, you know, when the sort of planning department often are kind of talking with developers and going, right, well, we want all these things from you, you know, developers are going, well, okay, fine, but which are the priorities? And it's the same question here for us, isn't it? Because there are trade-offs, and we have to think about what are acceptable trade-offs in terms of, well, how much affordable housing can we get out of a development? And when I talk about affordable housing, just to assure those on the call, I talk about social rent, I talk about shared ownership, I talk about anything that's local housing allowance or below, in terms of what's funded, not the national definition, which is slightly different. I think is 80% of market rent. Those all have questions around the costs of doing the build. If you're going to make it zero carbon, there are cost implications. If you're going to improve biodiversity net gain, there's cost implications. If you're going to do more of it at affordable housing rates, there's cost implications. And so we've got to think about what I'm hoping will come out of this challenge brief actually is some of the solutions about how we can get those better balance without having to sacrifice one over the other as much. You know, we've managed it on some of the developments that, yes, have had significant subsidy, where we're getting to either just under or over 50%. And the Innovate UK, I think, is over 50%, isn't it, of the whole programme will be affordable housing. And we're still managing to achieve, you know, significant reductions in carbon within those developments. So in terms of what success looks like, for me, it's more people being housed in accommodation they can afford, in good quality accommodation, in accommodation that is actually not things we're going to have to retrofit in 5 years, actually, because we've built in zero carbon now, or as close to it as we can get. And I think, you know, the MMC sector's got a hugely important role to play. And I think that would be one of the successes for me, is making sure that if we're going to move forward with things like MMC, that we've established that supply chain, that we've got that finance and investments secured through people that might be supporting and responding to the challenge brief. So it's a bit about getting the people in the houses, doing that in the best way possible for the environment and biodiversity, net gain and ecology. But then also ensuring that what we're doing is building up a supply chain that will last long into the future. So we're not sort of back here in a few years having the same discussion because, well, we did some amazing stuff to address the challenge, then all the investment dried up. So, you know, it's about the longevity for me as well. You know, when I've got 16,000 people on the waiting list, it's going to be a few years for us to kind of gradually get that need met.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. Stephen, there are a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to come to you in a moment. But before I do that, Tom, you mentioned the Innovate UK project that was funded, that was based in Bristol, that has just completed as of last month, in fact. And Mark, you, as L&G Modular Homes, you were involved as one of the 9 MMC partners that were part of that project. And if anyone hasn't heard of the Innovate UK funded project that we were part of for the last 18 months, if you do have a look on the Bristol Housing Festival website, you'll be able to see all sorts of more detail on that. But Mark, as one of those 9 MMC providers that were part of that project, we brought you into this call today, not because you're, a core partner for this Nesta Challenge brief, but because you're already doing and working in this space where these challenges are real. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about that in terms of, as somebody that is already doing this and already on the coal face of recognizing the tension in those challenges of developing more homes, but at the same time being aware of the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis. How are you as a company starting to tackle this? And more importantly, what are you really seeing as the real challenges? Obviously, you mentioned planning already, but are there other things that you tease out?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the Innovate project's been really interesting. It's got possibly the longest name that I can never quite remember, but it has been really useful in terms of kind of really putting MMC in the spotlight and kind of working with a very broad range of stakeholders. And like I said, we were one of 9 different MMC manufacturers, and it went from ourselves who were kind of on the kind of large industrial size all the way through to kind of bespoke modular homes, so kind of real blend of kind of people involved, and we use that process to look at our homes and kind of how we power them. And the big thing for us was about shifting from gas boilers over to air source heat pumps. And in the UK, we've got something coming up in 2025, which is a long-trailed idea of having something called the Future Home Standard. And the intent is by 2025, a new build home will be about 80% of the carbon emissions of a new build home now. Will be net zero ready, so kind of will primarily rely on the decarbonisation of the grid to achieve that net zero status. Yeah, so for us, well, and the other thing as well is moving away from fossil fuels, so kind of getting rid of gas. So the Innovate project has kind of really helped us kind of transition from our first development is in Selby with gas boilers, and Bristol is our second development, which will now be all electric. So it's been a great opportunity for us. I think Bonington's been a really interesting job, and that actually kind of going to take my hat off to the council who've driven a lot of the kind of the requirements in that process. It's a difficult site. It was some abandoned allotments. It had a very high level of biodiversity on site, and that's been kind of a real challenge for us as a business to kind of look at how we can minimize the impact of our site on biodiversity, but then also look at how we can improve it over time. So one of the things that we've ended up doing is looking at a 30-year management plan for the site to see how we can develop it. And it's been really interesting as well, because the site's got a site of nature conservation interest, on it. Which is a locally important site and kind of particularly kind of valuable for its grassland habitat species, and over time kind of bramble has come in, so it's been quite challenging, particularly locally. We've had a lot of discussions about kind of cutting trees down, but actually the site was really important for grassland, so that's one of the things that we've actually been cutting trees down to actually kind of self-seeded trees to kind of help kind of extend the grassland and give it more life. And amenity as well. There's a cycle path that runs through the site, and one of the things that we've been doing is looking at how we can upgrade that and make that into a much kind of better resource in the future. We're putting a community hub in, we've got a community garden, so there's a lot going on, but it has been really challenging, and again getting it to stack up commercially has also been interesting.
That's brilliant. So it really does kind of show off actually this challenge of when you've got those different elements competing, there is a question here around how do the finances work and how does it make it viable so that you can address both challenges, which are both incredibly important and neither one can be ignored. So how do we start to make all these things sort of stack up? And this is where, therefore, the Climate Smart Cities Challenge sort of comes into its own for Bristol in terms of looking at what does the model look like and how do we make this work? So Stephen, coming to you, I'd love to ask some very practical questions. And there's a few that are coming up already in the Q&A box, which would be great to address. So let's start with the most obvious. How do innovators join in and how do they offer a solution?
Yeah, fantastic. So as mentioned, we've been drafting, based on all of these stakeholder engagements in the last couple of months, a challenge brief, which is a longer document which goes into all sorts of detail about the particular challenge, and also a challenge statement, which is just a very pithy short paragraph or two that describes the call. And I can even read that out because it's so brief. So this is what Bristol and colleagues have drafted. We're looking for innovative business models, services, and/or products that can help shape a new housing development appraisal and financing model that enables the development of affordable zero-carbon new homes in the city starting in 2023. So that's a little sneak preview because that's not launched yet. But I hope no one's recording or writing that down verbatim. But anyway, you are all potential innovators, so I think it's good that you hear this. And so that's basically what's going to go out with a whole lot of more context and background. And it will be launched on November 3rd. And I'm sure that everyone that's participating here will be able to get the details of our launch event on the 3rd that will be online. And then basically there's a period in which you can, as potential innovators or partners, can approach the partners and also the Bristol City Council to find out more and to ask your questions. So there'll be a kind of a Q&A period in which you can find out more, and there'll be a very clear application form that you could submit, and the deadline for that is January 5th. And then within just a couple of weeks in January, we'll be announcing the kind of initial shortlist of finalists, not just for Bristol, but also for the 3 other cities taking part, which is Bogota in Colombia, Curitiba in Brazil, and Makindye Sabagabo in Uganda. So just to note that this call will be for 4 cities, and perhaps you're also interested in work. Maybe you're a company or an organization that works abroad and wants to look at those other ones as well. And so, yeah, the Innovators call is really open to anyone from anywhere in the world, not just in Bristol, but also in other countries. And one of the questions here is about sort of who might apply or what type of organizations. And so it's both, in answer to that question about whether it's a single organization or sort of consortia. So we've been having long discussions about this in the project teams. And it could be that you're an individual organization and you sort of have a partial solution to the overall systemic problem, because we recognize that coming up with a new financial model is not easy and requires a kind of systems approach, and therefore requires the involvement of many different partners. But maybe your solution sort of plugs one part of that. Maybe it's a particular financial product or service that you think helps to bring down the cost of zero carbon housing. So that could be one. Or you could apply it in a kind of consortia already, and you think that your sort of combination of partners could support Bristol in coming up with a solution. And I should also say that basically once you're selected, we enter into quite a long period of what we call systems demonstration. And so it's not the case that you would be selected and then your solution has to be kind of ready to roll out next week, and you're the one innovator that's been selected in Bristol. Rather, we'll be selecting a number of applications, assuming we get good quality in, but that's the intention. And we move into systems demonstration phase, where you'll be sort of collaborating with other innovators. We'll have a whole package of support for the innovators coming from Nesta Challenges, from the Connected Cities Catapult and other organizations that will be actually supporting the innovators to develop their product or service more. So you should definitely not think that to apply, you need to have the kind of finished solution, perfect answer. actually the project involves this demonstration period where you work with us and with the city and with all sorts of different technical partners to try and see if this can work and get it ready for a rollout that would be in 2023 only. So the project actually is quite a long part of the project is this demonstration phase. And yeah, I think is that enough of an answer?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful because it gives a really clear overview of actually who can apply, which is basically anybody as long as you've got a good idea, and the timeline of that. And that more information on that as we have it, as well as the kind of link to the event that Stephen was talking about, will be on the Bristol Housing Festival website. So do follow our website and our social media for more kind of heads up. Yes, Stephen.
Right, there's one thing I realized I forgot, which is because a lot of people say, well, what and then what? So what at the end of that? And I guess the goals of the project are from the project originators, and obviously these complement the goals of the individual cities and mostly are aligned. But the project's goal in its intention is to support innovators to test and scale up their ideas. So that's one objective. And the second one is to generate investments in solving these particular challenges that the cities are putting out. So there's a very clear objective that we're going to try and raise capital to help deliver some of these solutions in the cities. That's the collective ambition of the project partners and the project cities. So that's not an easy ambition to realize, but that's the goal. So it has it's not just a case of selecting some innovators and then saying, well, wasn't that great? We actually, we want these solutions or varieties of to be actually implemented in 2023 onwards. So that's the very ambitious goal of the project.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Stephen. And we've just had a message in the chat from Andy O'Brien as well, who's talking about actually having been working on this similar kinds of things for many, many years. So thank you so much for that, Andy. We'll kind of look into that and be in touch. We've also had a message, a Q&A here from somebody who's interested in holistic economic frameworks that could be used within this challenge. And I think this question is really interesting. Do pop in the Q&A if you'd like to read it in full. But essentially, the question is around whether the right framework will actually also provide a suitable common foundation for accelerating this change. And there's a number mentioned here, including donut economics and bioregioning and one planet living. And Alan, I just wanted to come to you and Tom as well. In terms of for Bristol, are there particular frameworks that you are most interested in or have been talked about a lot more, or that you're focusing on maybe as one city or as Bristol City Council that would be worth mentioning at this point? Or is this just very opening and yes, actually looking at these common frameworks would be helpful, but you haven't got a specific one in mind that you particularly have a line to as Bristol?
I mean, I can jump in on one part and then hand over to Tom afterwards and see if he's got any further thoughts. I think a number of the frameworks that are mentioned there are actually ones that draw from one that's already been mentioned by Stephen and one that I've worked on a fair bit, which is the Sustainable Development Goals framework. And that framework of 17 goals was agreed by every country of the world and has been adopted by all those countries. It's something we've been actively thinking about how we can try and deliver in Bristol for about 5 or 6 years now, pretty much since they were adopted themselves as goals. And in our minds, I think this is a really practical way to start to do that and to start to unpick what this global agenda and framework looks like at a local level, and how you can start to consider the interconnected elements that have already been mentioned of housing and climate and ecology, and by consequence, poverty and inequality in one approach. And that's something that both bioregional and donut economics have as well. So the bioregional model is often then mapped against the SDGs because there's a lot of common ways of thinking. And the donut economics model grew from the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework. And so in some ways, we are already thinking about both of those models. But I think, as you say, we're not necessarily constrained to any one model, and actually any innovators or ideators who come up with new ways of working this through is just as powerful if it's able to deliver on across those issues of inequality, environment, and new homes, then actually that's almost as powerful whether or not they're communicating it in that way, because in some ways the communication of that through a particular framework is the sort of final step. I think there's definitely some opportunity though from this of demonstrating that a new framework and a new way of working can then have impact. And I think that's one of the really exciting things. And retrofit's been mentioned earlier, and that's something that we discussed, whether we should be focusing on retrofit rather than new homes. But we think that there's probably common opportunities between retrofit and new homes if we are able to deliver a new financial model for the city, and if innovators are able to pull apart this challenge and reconstitute it into something that works. So I think that's probably what I'd say. I'll hand over to Tom in case he's got anything else to add.
That was quite thorough. I don't know if I've got much to add to that. I think the key message for me is that, we're putting a challenge brief out there, and it's for people to come to us with what they see as the innovative solutions and the models and frameworks that those may operate. And obviously the UN Sustainable Development Goals is a really key one for us, and one that we're embedding throughout the work we're doing across the city. So, that's just something I'd have in hand. And the other thing to bear in mind is there's going to be a lot of opportunity with things we're either going to be out to consult on or doing within the city anyway. We're launching a consultation this week on our 30-year business plan for our kind of housing revenue accounts, for our council kind of housing. And part of the big discussions on that is going to be what we're investing and where we're investing it, and what are the opportunities for innovation. Thinking about retrofit versus building new council homes, but doing that efficiently, versus maintenance and repairs. Those are the kind of bread and butter issues that there are for local residents. So there's plenty of opportunity out there, and that my message is bring your ideas, bring your solutions forward. We want to engage with you. We want to really kind of continue to be a city that's driving innovation, driving different ways of doing things, taking that plunge, which isn't always easy to do, and then doing the learning from it as well. We're not always going to get it right, are we? But the point is, you test, you learn, you innovate, then you kind of keep going, from my perspective.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And speaking of frameworks and definitions and things like that, Mark, at the beginning, you mentioned about the importance for defining what we mean by carbon, low carbon, zero carbon, which part of the life cycle of everything. We're going to talk about carbon in, and we're very aware. We've had lots of conversations when we've been writing the challenge brief around what phraseology are we going to use and which framework are we going to align ourselves to, or are we not, or how are we going to how do we try and sum this up? Because as you said, Mark, there are lots and lots of different definitions out there around carbon. So from your perspective as somebody who is already on the ground and already working in there, how do we define this need for lower carbon? And then I'll come back to the team in terms of how we framed it within the challenge brief as well.
Yeah, I think the whole carbon debate, it's like unpeeling an onion. I mean, the more you look at it, the more kind of layers and complexity that you find. I mean, kind of the whole legal framework or the regulatory framework in the UK is really focused on regulated carbon. So that's the operation of the house, the heating, the lighting, hot water. And that's the bit I think that we've really cracked. But for me, it's about whole life carbon, and that's we've been looking at it through the slightly wrong lens, and that's one of the things that we're trying to do as a business at the moment, is really understand our whole life carbon. So that's everything from how our factory operates, our transport of modules, materials, the operation of the houses, and their ultimate disposal. You have to look at carbon in with a real depth of perspective, and some of the work that we've been doing around whole life carbon, actually the second biggest source of carbon in our homes is actually the photovoltaic panels that we're putting on our houses. So decisions are being made because we're just so focused on regulated carbon that actually kind of have knock-on implications further down the line. So it's a really tough one. I think the UK GBC is probably leading in terms of kind of the analysis framework for this. And there's a lot of issues about the quality of data as well at the moment, particularly with whole life carbon. So UK GBC is really pushing people down construction carbon, which is kind of the carbon up to handing over the keys effectively. And that's where there's more robust data. But it's a real challenge.
Yeah, it definitely is, isn't it? But that's really helpful. Thank you, Mark. And Jessie, could you explain for those watching where have we landed and why have we landed where we've landed with the challenge brief?
Sure. As you said, we did go backwards and forwards a little bit. We realized even within our own brief, we were all using different terms. And so we had to kind of figure out, what are we going to say? What kind of phrasing are we going to use? And I think where we landed was on low carbon. And that's not to say that we don't want to commit to something. What we actually want to leave space for is for innovators to come with their own measurement framework. And so we don't really mind which one they necessarily use, and we don't want to limit them to one specifically. But we do need them to demonstrate some kind of measurement of how they are measuring the carbon for the development. So I think for us at this stage, we may need to come back to that, but at this stage, we wanted to leave it open for those innovators to come with their idea and their measurement.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And Alan, did you want to add anything into that?
No, I think that's pretty much everything from Jessie there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm aware we are starting rapidly to run out of time. There's another question in here, Stephen, I'd like to just bring to you, though, around how we're planning to engage and develop a network of innovators. So I wondered, and specifically how we ensure projects are demand-driven or user-led. And I wondered if you could speak to that from the organising perspective.
Yeah, I think so. We're targeting kind of four main levels or groups, if you like. One is we're doing a lot of, at a global perspective, we're doing a lot of advertising and connecting to innovator networks at the Dubai Expo. This is the World Expo that takes place every, I don't know how often actually, but a very large event, 4 or 5 months long, and this year taking place in Dubai. So there'll be a whole lot of work there at the Swedish National Government Pavilion, because this project is funded by Swedish partners to try and get the word out to global innovators there. And then the other one is to really reach out to UK-based networks of SMEs and companies that are going through accelerator programs and these kinds of startups. So this is happening mainly through our partner with Nesta Challenges, and as I mentioned, also maybe some other networks like Connected Places Catapult, who have kind of databases of companies and innovators working in these fields that will get the word out. And the third is with you, and we need Bristol's local networks to engage, and that's the purpose of doing sessions like this, to try and engage local innovators. And as I mentioned, in terms of, that's how we're sort of trying to engage, and then in terms of working with them, that's the whole systems. Once that a group are selected, the systems demonstration phase is the period in which we really work with those innovators to support them and help them develop their solutions and ideas. So it's a two-way thing, as I mentioned earlier, not only helping Bristol, but the project should also be helping the innovators to get further, even if that one specific solution is not the one that ends up being implemented on the specific site in Bristol. There are benefits to just participating, and that that your solution's been developed and worked on and is perhaps at a later stage of development by the time we're through with the project. So I hope that.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm aware we are pretty much out of time. So just before I close this webinar, I just want to say a massive thank you to Jessie, to Alan, to Stephen, to Mark, and to Tom. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much too for those of you that you've popped questions in the box and made comments in the chat. I'm aware that as we start to open this conversation, more questions are raised and more specifics about how this is going to work start to sort of filter through, start to realize, oh, but what about that? What about that? So we would love to stay in touch with you, particularly around this this challenge, because we are looking to get it as far and wide in Bristol as possible. So if you do have any more questions, please do get in touch with the Bristol Housing Festival. You can reach us on hello@bristolhousingfestival.org.uk, and I'm hoping somebody will magically pop that in the chat box for us. That's hello@bristolhousingfestival.org.uk. And do ask your questions and follow us on that website, because as I said, more and more will go up on there as this challenge goes live and with more opportunities. And do spread the word. Please do put this webinar recording out on your social channels. Do tell more people about this Climate Smart Cities Challenge. We would really like to make sure that this is well advertised across the Bristol networks. We will be doing our best, but there will be people we can't reach. So please do help us and make sure that's spread out. But like I said, we would really like to talk to anyone on here that is more interested in learning more. So do please get in touch. But thank you so much from me. Thank you so much to our panelists. And thank you so much for being part of this, those of you that are watching.